I was tempted to stay home this morning. In fact, yesterday, I was here and Graham offered to pre-record something just in case my voice was worse today, so that I wouldn't have to be here today. And Lori even said, like, can't someone else, like they could just read your blog, or surely someone else could lead the service. You should stay home. First of all, you're sick. Secondly, you might share that with other people. And I'm like, no, I'll wear a mask, it'll be fine. But I was tempted for a moment to stand up to them and to just give in, and say, no, I'll stay home. Excuse me a minute. Okay. Or I gave in to the temptation to be here. Because who doesn't like to stand in front of a room full of people and talk? Like center stage and everything, right? Yeah. And besides, I'd worked up a really good message for today. Yeah, so what if I'm sick? It doesn't matter. So what if you can hardly hear what I'm saying because my voice is so bad? I'm here, so I gave in. Wait, or did I resist? I guess it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Clearly, what did Wes say earlier? It's situational. Yes, surely it is, of course, but it's also about perspective, too, as to what you think temptation is about. And what it is that you're giving into, or what it is that you're being tempted to do or not to do. It's very complicated, isn't it? So we make it easier. We make sure that when we talk about temptation, first of all, we make sure that we know that temptation is, whatever it is, inherently there's something bad here. And the other thing is that we make sure that we can blame someone else for it, or something else. It's the chocolate's fault. I don't know if you noticed, but today's PowerPoint has a theme. It's the chocolate's fault. You ask somebody what they like to give up for Lent, and invariably the top two things are chocolate and coffee. Every now and then there's, smoking, if somebody still does that. But it's usually chocolate and coffee. And then that's followed by a ha. Because realistically, who gives up coffee and chocolate? Come on. Because we think that's temptation. But temptation is also, suddenly feeling tempted to say, I don't know, invade another country, or take a life, or intentionally hurt someone. It's a big deal. But as long as we can make sure that we can blame someone else or something else, then it's not on us, is it? Oh, yes, it is. Because it's precisely about us. We tell this story in Genesis where it's really easy to put blame in a whole variety of places so that we can talk about how we have original sin. We can talk about how Adam and Eve sinned and therefore were tossed out of the garden. So, first of all, was their sin that they actually ate the apple or from the tree, or was their sin that they listened to the snake? It doesn't matter. Either way, you get to blame someone else. And right in the story, what's the first thing that happens? Well, the snake gets blamed. You can blame the woman. You can blame, there's all sorts of people. Isn't that useful? Think of how useful that was historically. First of all, we could put a face on evil. It's snakes. Secondly, we can blame one gender over another. Man, that's been useful. But hang on. What if we told that story a little bit differently? What if we told that story as the way we acquired free will by making a choice that had consequences? And in fact, in making that choice, they had all the information they needed. They were informed that they should not eat of this one particular tree. They received additional information that said, oh, yes, you can. And then they had additional information that said, oh, look, it looks delicious. Let's just try it. Oh, it tastes delicious too. Let's eat. And then suddenly they realized they were aware. They had choices. Suddenly they could tell the difference between things like, do I have clothes on and do I not? Doesn't matter. I don't care. Well, I don't know. So this story gives us not only original sin, it also gives us all sorts of great things like shame and guilt. Awesome, eh? That's one of our original stories. It gives us sin and guilt and shame. What if instead it gave us the understanding that we have free will to make decisions, and decisions have consequences? And perhaps even in that original story, the consequence wasn't bad. We tell the story like they sinned and then they were tossed out of the garden into this hellscape that we live in. Really? What if they learned to make decisions and make choices and they were empowered and stepped out into the world to do what God intended, which was for us to be stewards of creation? How about we told the story that way? Maybe suddenly then temptation isn't always bad. Think of all of the stories in Hebrew scripture, let alone other cultures and their religious traditions, where it appears as though God, however we know God, throws temptation in our way all the time. Don't you think that's a little manipulative, given that we have free will? What if it isn't about the stuff? What if it's about us making choices? And how we make those choices. What if Adam and Eve made the choice to eat the apple because they had all the information they needed? And their decision came from a sense of the goodness that is inherently within them. I mean, think about how we tell that story. All these things are created and they are good, they are good, they are good. And then Adam and Eve are created and they are very good. And then suddenly they're not. Why? Because we determined they made the wrong choice and therefore are sinners and were cast out of the garden into this. What if they made the right choice, realizing there were consequences, and then had to live into those consequences? I know what you're going to say, but Robin, it's all downhill from there. Yes, it is, and we didn't always make the right decisions. We still don't. We struggle with it. But what if instead of beginning with the idea that we're going to make a bad one and we're going to get punished for it because we're inherently sinful, we started with we're inherently good? What kind of a decision would we make if we lived from a sense of being inherently good? What kind of decisions would we make if we lived from a sense of knowing that we're created in the image of God, the divine spirit in us is good? We'd share because we care. That was Peter's solution to the chocolate bar earlier, right? We should share because we care. Not because we made any side deals or people necessarily helped us with anything. We should just share because we care. Well, of course we should. How hard is it to make that decision sometimes? It's tricky, isn't it? Because we have this learned idea that it's not just about us, it's about the things that act upon us. And temptation is an outside force. It's not, though. It's about us and the decisions that we make. And especially when it comes to being able to put a face on evil, right? What if we told the story of Jesus in the wilderness I don't know, do you remember that famous story? What was that? There was a TV show about the Bible where they told this story, and the face of the character who's the devil looks suspiciously like Barack Obama. Do you remember that? We put a face on the devil. And whoever made that show somehow, I don't know what they were thinking. But if we can put a face on evil, we can blame it. We can label it. And we can hold it out here. But what if that story isn't about evil testing Jesus, but about Jesus testing Jesus to figure out who he is, how he should do his ministry, how he should live into this calling he has? What if that's what the wilderness experience was about? It wasn't so much about a test that could be failed, but a test from which we would learn. When Jesus is in the desert, in the wilderness, we tell the story where a figure appears, the devil. We even sometimes say, Satan, right? You know the origin of the word Satan in Hebrew culture? It's not actually about the devil. It means the tester, the advocate. It has nothing to, there's no necessarily a connotation of evil there, although some people do say that it means lawyer. But other than that, there's no connotation that there's anything bad about being a tester, an advocate. You're simply the one who tests the situation in order to seek the answer. Managed to turn that into evil too, didn't we? If the point is to find the correct answer, the right answer, however you want to qualify that answer, even that's going to be influenced by what we've learned, isn't it? And what we've learned from the very beginning is that we are inherently sinful. Temptation's bad. What if we approached our decision-making from the view of we are inherently good? That's hard because we have a hard enough time figuring out if we are inherently good. But we are. All of creation is. What's interesting about it, though, is that just like we've been talking about this the last few weeks in the Bible study with creation, talking about creation stories, is that if we have free will, isn't it possible that in its own way, creation does too? In other words, no one's controlling it necessarily. Things happen the way they do because they happen the way they do, not because someone makes it do that. And so, of course, there will be moments where bad things are going to happen. Of course there are. There'll be moments when good things are going to happen. We live with both of those things. We live with the need to make decisions all the time. And the ones that we can certainly label as temptation are much easier to deal with, aren't they? Because we just labeled them. And now we understand temptation's a bad thing, so that's going to be a bad thing. So don't give in to eating that extra piece of chocolate. Why not? Come on. That context is very different than the decisions we make around life and death, aren't they? And there's a whole wash of things in between. Decisions that we make every day. What if we worked harder at making those decisions from the right place? What if we understood this moment in the Lord's Prayer of, instead of saying, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil, as if that way we can entrust that to some other force to take care of us, and instead spoke that from ourselves. from the God that lives in each of us. You know, I was just reading about this past week, and I didn't realize this. In 2019, Pope Francis changed the words of the Lord's Prayer. This phrase, specifically. I think what he changed it to was something like, and don't let us fall into temptation. Because he feels that saying, lead us not into temptation, in English, sounds very much like there's the implication that God might lead us into temptation, and His holiness doesn't feel that God would do that. We do that, not God. So he thought he should change the words. You can imagine what the response was. Some people really don't like it because, after all, you know, we know the traditional words we learned in Sunday school and we're not saying anything different. Biblical scholars didn't like it either because they point to a variety of occasions in the Bible where indeed God does appear to lead us into temptation intentionally in order to test us. And what examples do they cite primarily? Adam and Eve and Jesus in the wilderness. There's a whole bunch more too. Yeah, let's just make sure we keep it as an outside force that we don't have any control over. Some people don't like it. Some people also don't like it because, and scholars again will tell you that the most accurate translation of the original Greek version that we have, because that's all we have, the closest we can get to the original version that would have been written is in Greek, ancient Greek, that translates quite literally as, lead us not into temptation. But even some of them are willing to concede that may not have literally been the intention. That the Pope's right. The intention isn't to imply that God would do it on purpose, but instead that God would help us, guide us away from temptation. I think we're starting to get closer to where we're at. For me, I honestly don't believe that God leads us to temptation. I also don't believe that temptation is necessarily bad. I don't think it's inherently evil. But then I also don't think, and this is a sermon for way another time, I have some issues around evil itself. If you're telling me it's the antithesis of good, okay. If you're telling me it's some sort of entity or thing that exists in order to test us or make life difficult for us or, you know, all that kind of stuff, I have some issues with that. And all of that comes back, for me, it all comes back to we are inherently good. We are created in the image of God and of the earth, the divine spirit, and of creation. Again, our factory setting is good. If we can get in touch with that, and that's what Jesus is about. That's what Jesus is about. And so when it comes to things like lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Ooh, that was slightly Freudian, wasn't it? But deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. It's less about being steered in the right direction and more about being accompanied wherever we go. Because we have free will. We have the power of decision making. We trust that God is with us in the decisions we make. And when we make those decisions, we make them from our sense of good. Let's say that differently. We should make them from our sense of being inherently good. We don't always. We don't always. We make wrong decisions all the time. We make bad decisions all the time. Even when we do, God is still with us. And I think that's the point in the prayer. It's not so much direct my life. as go with me where I go. Help me make right decisions. Keep me inherently good. And that's not just the power of saying that ourselves. It's when we say it communally, when we share it communally, as that thing that kind of bonds us as a community. We are reinforcing each other. We are helping each other. I could use that cup of hot chocolate right now. I'm tempted. And it definitely would be the right decision. That's what this is about for me. It's not about being led necessarily as guided, as accompanied. I have the power to make decisions. How I make those decisions for me needs to example the life of Jesus. That's what Jesus is about, showing us not just what's right and wrong or making the right decision, but to live from that place in ourselves that will lead us there. And God goes with us wherever we go.